All right.
Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And with me is my regular Wednesday guest, Krys Copeland. Hi, Krys.
Hi, Reverend Don. Good to see you again.
And today we will be discussing new things at CorellianPublishing.com. And I hope that you will enjoy the conversation. As always, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. They will appear here in our chat room, but I don't have the chat room on screen today because we have a guest, and I want to make sure we have room for both of us. But we still will see your comments, so please feel free to join in the conversation. So, Krys, what have you got for us today?
So I'm really excited about today's conversation because it's a major update from Ed Hubbard about his next book, which was Defense Manual Volume 2, How to Win. We've received parts of the rough draft, and so there are some really interesting parts of it that I'd like to just bring up as, hey, you're going to find out about this information in the book. Now, if you haven't read the original, you can find that for free on our website, CorellianPublishing.com. Just click on books, find Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2, which should be right at the top. And when you click on that page, you will see the link to the PDF for Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 1.
We want to say hello to Renee in the chat room and hello to Janet Winston in the chat room. It's good to see you both.
Hi, Renee. Hi, Janet. So I spoke with Ed yesterday and went through some of the details that he's including in this, and it's really exciting to see it come together because we hear like this part's going to be in there or that part's going to be in there or a rumor that this one might be, but now we're actually seeing it come together, and it's really interesting to watch his process. And one of the things that he talks about a lot throughout the book, one of the most important concepts he talks about is reputational conflict.
Mm-hmm.
The world is more connected than ever before. So reputational warfare has become a new battlefield. It's one where words and digital footprints wield more power than we've ever imagined. So, as the Defense Manual Volume 2 explains, reputation is now the currency of today's attention economy. And I think that attention economy is a really interesting one to pay attention to because as we as our 20th century economy goes through this process of change, what we're noticing is that I think my partner and I were just talking about this yesterday, where we were watching a TV show where people were talking about how many followers they
Mm-hmm.
had, and how that's now a representation of how much power you have in the world. And we've seen that most recently with Taylor Swift coming out in support of Kamala Harris. That led to 330,000 clicks in the first 24 hours of her story being up, or within the first few hours. When the full cycle of that story on Instagram finished, there were over 400,000 clicks on that link to register to vote. From her roughly 300 million followers online. And 300 million, the United States population is 325 billion. Just to show you the kind of numbers we're talking about there. Those are numbers that sway, especially a very close election like what we're seeing in this election cycle. So yeah, that currency, that reputational currency is a real thing. It is really active in our world already. So I'm very curious to see what the audience thinks about that. Do you think that managing your reputation online is important in our world today? And if so, how do you manage your own reputation in this hyper-connected world? Or have you ever felt the pressure to constantly kind of curate your public image? Be careful about what you put online, or carefully select what you do put online. And Reverend Don,
We
I'm
want
very
to say hello
curious.
to Martin in the chat room.
Hi, Martin. That's my partner. So I'm very curious to see how you manage this, especially as someone who is as public of a figure as you are. Does your reputation play a concern when you consider what to post online
Well,
or what to say publicly, even?
I think firstly, on the subject of people influencing people, I think what we're seeing now is an expansion of what's always been a dynamic. I mean, the person living in the small town who managed all the gossip for the community was doing exactly the same thing as a modern social media influencer. The local newspaper was doing the same thing. It's just become hypercharged. If you ask me about curating my public image, I was raised that way. I was raised in a family that was very concerned about public image from as early as I can remember. How you dressed, how you acted, what people thought were all very important. And that certainly only became more of a concern as I found myself in increasingly public positions. So I always was extraordinarily careful with my image, with what I would say. I was talking the other day, last week, I believe, about always wanting to leave, say, 24 hours before making a response to any sort of communication that had an emotional impact.
Also,
And
advice I
even
give my
even
students
sometimes when
in
not.
business English. Yeah.
Um, and we want to say hello to Timothy in the chat room. It's good to see you.
Hi, Timothy.
Um, but but yes, I always took that point of view. I've always, most always, been careful of what I had to say, particularly in any written communication. And partly because I've always been under the understanding that once it's online, it's indefinitely there. But even if it's not, once it's in people's minds, um, it's there. And during the many years that I was the active head of the Corellian tradition, I wasn't just speaking for myself. Now, today that I'm um, in a state of retirement and office, I feel like I can be a little bit less curated and have said a few things I might not have said before. But I always regarded it as very important, and I think everybody else really would benefit from doing that as well.
You're in
At
your
least,
Obama post-presidency years right now, so you can kind of be a little freer with what you say.
um, but if you want to have any kind of influence in the world, your image and how you're perceived are very important to that. And I know people who um, pay no attention to this and then wonder why they're not better understood or more paid attention to. And there are reasons that people can be paid more attention to than others, and one of them is often the way they speak, what they choose to say and not say, and what their image is. And these are not random, irrelevant things. And if the image you're projecting to the world is of someone who does not care about anything particularly, you're not going to be taken terribly seriously. Um, if the image you're projecting to the world um, is all about your hurts and pains, you're not going to be the person that people look to for advice because it obviously hasn't helped you. Um, that doesn't mean that you can't have a well curated image and still talk about those things, but it's how you do it.
Yeah.
And I was raised with the idea that you're always on display. But I remember my mother talking to me about how when she was a child, she and my grandmother were being followed by reporters and how they had to hide behind trash cans so they would not be visible as the reporters went by. And that was a very, very formative event in her life. And it had to do with a particular situation. But she was raised with that idea that, yes, you may always be under observation, even when you don't know it. And I was raised that way too, and I think it's absolutely true.
And Timothy in
And
the chat says, gives a great example with director Steve Peace, who made the bad film Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I wouldn't say it was bad so much as campy. I think it was
mm,
really campy, but I absolutely love campy films. But it's from the 1970s, and in the 1990s, he made a run for state office in California, but because he had made this kind of cheesy, campy movie, nobody took him seriously. And Sonny Bono, he gives that other example, had a challenging time getting elected in the California state. I'm guessing the Congress, because of his connection with Sonny and Cher.
well, I mean, with Sonny Bono, the image that he portrayed in that well, in the Sonny and Cher program in particular, but throughout that marriage, was kind of a
Sidekick role.
yeah. I mean, he was definitely portrayed as being dominated by Cher, who was a stronger personality, and as being a bit of a loser, which did make it a little bit hard to counteract that image. I think eventually he was able to do it by saying, you know, I'm in show business. That was character. That was not my actual personality. I'm not certain if that's exactly what he did, but you know, that's the thing. And it's true. When people know you with one image, it can be very hard for them to change that image. And um, so you kind of need to think about how you want to be perceived, whether we're talking about a public figure. And hello to Nicholas in the chat room. It's
Hi,
good to see you,
Nicholas.
Nicholas.
Good to see you.
Or just in your private life, how people look at you is going to have a bit to do with how you present yourself. And if you don't realize that, I mean, I'm known for my wardrobe, and I always put a lot of thought into what I'm going to wear. I don't normally just grab things out of the closet, but when I do, the things in my closet are put together in such a way that I could still grab something out of the closet and it would go together well. But I always think about that. And that definitely has, I think, an effect on how people perceive me. I've seen people who seem to pay no attention to how they're dressed, wear clothes that don't, well, that leave the bottom of their belly showing, for example, or that have open tears in them that are not fashionable tears, and then wonder why this negatively impacts their image. Of course it does. It's going to. And I think very, very many people, and I guess maybe in their life it doesn't matter, but if you're going to be a public figure, it very much does.
Mm.
And it will affect how people perceive you. You know, I talk a lot about a certain group of elders who are very upset that no one's listening to them, quote unquote. But you know, I would add to that that the way they've portrayed themselves in certain cases is also part of that. The way they've expressed themselves, particularly to the people that they're now upset at not having as an audience, has everything to do with how they got there. And there are lots of elders in our community who are very much listened to. I consider myself one of them. And there are many others, such as Selena Fox, for example, who doesn't have any trouble getting people to listen to her. But you know, if you look at Selena Fox, she's very careful about her image. She's very careful about her communications. She makes sure that what she does in public is what she means to do. And you know, this is very important.
Yeah.
And if you want to be perceived in a certain way, you have to portray yourself in that way. You have to live that life. Um, and if you don't, you'll be perceived in whatever way you are presenting yourself.
Absolutely. And Timothy in the chat says folks have to reinvent themselves, and that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me personally, uh, I have borderline personality disorder. I've been very open with that on social media, online, and in my community. And because of that, I have this ability to kind of put on costumes
Hmm.
and be whoever I need to be in that moment.
Hmm.
That stems from having to do that throughout my life in order to just survive, and now it's just become a reaction mechanism. But it has been an incredibly helpful skill to have.
Oh, I would
Uh,
imagine.
and these are some of the same topics that I talk about in a lot of my international business English classes. English is a very small part of what I teach in there
Hmm.
overall. A lot of what I teach is the unspoken communication, in
Hmm.
especially in American culture, in American English.
Well,
And
that is the thing.
yeah, absolutely. And we're considered, if you look at the scale of low context cultures versus high context cultures. Low context meaning that what we say is exactly what we mean, versus high context cultures where gestures and facial expressions and your tone of voice have a lot to say as well. What's left unspoken speaks volumes in those cultures. Japan is a great example of this. China as well. But in America, we are the lowest context culture in the world, largely due to the fact that we have the greatest numbers of immigrants. So
Hmm.
if we're trying to speak across different cultures, we have to speak very clearly to each other. And even
Yes.
within our own culture, which is the least context culture in the world, we still have tons of context
Hmm.
to read through when we're talking to people. Mary says
Yes, indeed.
she also has BPD. Yeah, it's a tough situation sometimes, but we have blessings from it as well. There are gifts with it as well. So it's a mixed bag for
And
us.
we want to say hello to Bonnie
Mhm.
and to Bonnie Smith and to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room.
Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Mary. And Timothy says micro expressions, body language, stuff folks see at the first 5 seconds. Yes. And
Hmm.
throughout the conversation, I can notice if there's like a conversational shift without people saying anything. It will be
Hmm.
in their body language. It will be in the way they move, the way they're looking, and being, a little sensitive to those things is really important. Erin Meyer, in her book, The Culture Map, refers to it as listening to the air. And she gets
Hmm.
this from a Japanese term, ko, which is short for a Japanese term that I can't remember the full meaning or the full phrase, but it means literally to listen to or to read the air. And that's a really important skill to develop, especially when it comes to combating reputational damage or curating your image publicly.
The other thing you need to remember is that not everyone, um, and hello to Black Crystal in the chat room, not everyone in any particular part of the world is necessarily going to be speaking the same language um, in terms of expressions and so forth. And some of the things that I was raised to consider polite behavior were diametrically opposed to things that were done in the wider society. I only really came to realize that as a teenager as I began to get farther out into the wider society. Like eye contact, for example.
Mhm.
I was taught that unless it's a very intimate relationship, eye contact was very inappropriate. It was considered a challenge
Mm.
unless you were on intimate terms with the person. And what you would do, and I nobody said this to me, but I learned it from my mother and other members of my family from what they did. And what we tended to do was basically to look at the upper chest. And only later did I realize, oh, that lady thinks I'm looking at her bosom. And I had to change my behavior for the wider society I was in and actually start looking people in the eyes. And I remember when I started this, I was probably about 16, and it took a little doing because at first it was, I think, a little challenging the way I did it because I didn't know how to do that. Speaking with my hands is another thing. That was something I was taught was absolutely not done. Um, but as I got out into the wider society, I found that the wider society did do it. And if I wanted to be understood by them, I needed to learn it. So today I use my hands quite a bit, but that's diametrically opposite to how I was raised. Um, but I am conscious of the fact that not everyone is going to be using the language of the wider society, and that's something you have to bear in mind too. And at this moment, we want to take a message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. And since we have a sponsor and everything, okay, thank you to our sponsor, and we want to thank Equinox Learning Hub for advertising with us, and I also want to take a moment with our second sponsor, who is me, and we'll see if we can do that anymore.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And there we go. And Timothy says, I just love technology. Yeah, I find that the and hello to Selena Acevedo. It's good to see you.
Hello, Selena. And Timothy also says it has a great topic here that Ed actually brings up quite a bit in the book as well. Folks often put so much emphasis into jealousy based on how the evil eye works and how mythology works, or the evil eye myth works. And so, yeah, that's actually a really great point, that jealousy is often a root cause of witch wars. In fact, Ed refers to it more as ego. But definitely ego and jealousy are often tied together, because our ego is based on how much we have or don't have in many cases, or how much power we have or don't have. So yeah, that was a really fascinating concept that Ed breaks down in the book, and also gives excellent advice for how to manage your public image, as well as how to fend off from attacks. So going into some of this weaponization of fear that's going on in the world. You see this a lot with, the term that Ed brings up in the book is the scientific term for it, neuro-linguistic programming, which is when false memories can be implanted as part of psychological manipulation. So that's a lot of science to basically define the term gaslighting. And gaslighting is a real big issue. Like, people can convince you that you're the one that's crazy, and that they're the ones that are, perfectly sane, or they're the ones that have all the answers in life. And if only you would follow what they said to do, and likely give them a lot of money while they're doing it, then you'll have the life that they have. And so that psychological warfare plays a big role in a lot of our witch wars. Have you ever experienced that yourself, where you've had to fend off attacks of gaslighting or psychological manipulation? And if so, how did you combat that?
Absolutely. Many times. Some of them I've referred to on here. But to go straight to how to defend yourself, there are a couple of things I would say. The first one is to just keep doing what you're doing. Don't let it disrupt you if you can avoid it. and make sure to continue to portray yourself as you want to be seen. Many things that I have done over the years were helpful in avoiding that kind of attack, including much of the video work, because it put me in front of people. They could actually see me. And I think that would be my advice to people in that situation. Make sure that you continue to be seen. Make sure you continue to do what you've been doing. And for the most part, don't engage with it.
Yeah.
And just last year, we had someone doing massive gaslighting. Against a number of people, but particularly myself. And, a year later, it's pretty obvious to anyone with eyes that that's all that it was. And yet many people actually bought this. And one of the interesting things about it, and I've talked about this before, is that people often have a very hard time reassessing an idea once they've adopted it. But, it should be very obvious a year later what was true and what was not. But I don't know if the people who allowed themselves to be gaslighted are going to now allow themselves to notice that they were. I found that sometimes people find that very hard to admit.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very valuable tool, I suppose. But
Selena in the chat mentions a personal story of having this issue with her daughter and still sending her love no matter what. And of course, that's what you have to do as a pagan anyway. Even if someone is gaslighting and you do need to distance yourself or something, you don't have to distance with hatred in your heart. You can distance with understanding, with acceptance that they're just not in a good place right now to be able to communicate clearly, while still holding them accountable for their actions. But having that ability to distance without anger in your heart over it, without wasting your own energy even more on it.
Well, when you put it that way, you're absolutely right, because when you obsess over these things, you're only wasting your own energy. Mm-hmm. You're preventing yourself from doing that next right thing. So to the extent that you can do that, it is certainly always good. Now, we're human. We're naturally going to have emotions around this kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, the less that you can get caught up in it, the better you're going to be. Absolutely. And I see with that we're near the end of our half hour. So thank you for joining us, Krys. If you're interested in these subjects, the Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2 is coming soon from KorellianPublishing.com. You can pre-order it there now. And you can also order any of many other books that we have for offer.
And thank you so much for supporting our ministries, too. And everything that you purchase on there goes to supporting our authors and supporting this ministry that we have. So we always appreciate every single purchase that you make on there.
Yes, indeed. So now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be mindful of how other people perceive us, to help us to be mindful of how we express ourselves so that we may do so in the most positive manner. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives. We rejoice in this walk we walk together, and knowing you are always with us, still from respect, we thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. Krys, thank you for your presence. And I'll be back tomorrow. Until next time, may you blessed be.